to this Veteran Wellbeing Summit webinar. My name is Daniel Sloan. I'm a member of the South Macquarie RSL sub-branch, and I'm pleased to be hosted to support an environment where all Australians are engaged, motivated to learn and develop, and are proactive in managing their own wellbeing. We are gathering stories and people who have success in promoting veteran wellbeing, mental health, and suicide prevention. Before I hand over to our presenter, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the same link you're using now. Next, we'd love to hear from you during the presentation. If you have any questions for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering questions at the end of the session. However, if you have a question during the session, please send it through, and I'll jump in and we'll hopefully get that answered. If we don't get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar using your social networks using the VWS 2019 hashtag. Let's start. I'd like to welcome our presenter this evening, M Fry. She's speaking on the psychological effects of service. Megan is a clinical psychologist who owns and operates her own private practice at Bold Hills, Brisbane, Queensland. As an ex-serving soldier and military psychologist, Megan has spent a large proportion of her career working with military personnel. In recent years, Megan has enjoyed combining her two passions, schema therapy and veteran mental health. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's really exciting to be here and share with everyone tonight.
Okay, I think it's right to go. So I'll let you start, Megan. Thanks very much.
Hello to everyone out there. So as Dan said, my background is military. My husband's serving, my dad's a Vietnam veteran. So I'm really passionate about this work and being here tonight to share. I really started to focus on the psychological effects of service, and I think it's really important for us to have a conversation about this topic. As a result of my work in the military, I tended to see that the traumatic experience when working with veterans wasn't always the presenting problem. And what was often behind the trauma, the actual start point, was things more like how a soldier felt or reacted in a traumatic moment, uncertainty over actions, performance, or competence, chronic feelings of being let down, under-recognized for achievements, guilt regarding actions taken or not taken, and not feeling good enough. And it was as a result, and this was predominantly as a result of my 5 years working as a contracted psychologist, working with Special Forces soldiers in Sydney, watching them come back to back from deployments. And it was these themes that I became particularly interested in. And I tended to start to see a difference in this hot topic word being resilience, this catchphrase that everyone likes, and noticed that there was what I called a truly resilient group and more what I call a fake resilient group. And I guess the fake resilient group were functioning with dysfunction. They could come to work, they could do their job, but on the insides or behind the scenes, there was a lot of dysfunction going on. So even though they were very resilient and could do their job and perform really well, there was a lot of dysfunction going on inside. And there were a lot of consistencies that I saw across this population, which is what I started to call an effective service. The disconnect from home, from society, and being able to think in any other way than of being a soldier. If I'm not a soldier, then who am I? And this became really important for me. And I really started to see that reintegration was a core issue. So taking my military knowledge and experiences, what I've learned from working with service personnel, we then turn and look at the research. And we see the exact same things in the research. Transition from the military is widely cited as a significant and increasingly important issue to be addressed. The difficulties that ex-serving military personnel experience extend far beyond deployment-related trauma experiences and relate more broadly to just transitional and cultural issues. The issues reintegrating post-military are well documented back to homecoming theory, developed after World War II, and include issues around disconnection and alienation due to the difference between the military and the civilian environments. The transition between the two different environments requires a range of simultaneous life changes, such as changes in identity, occupation, finances, social support, relationships, routine, residence, and that can have a cumulative and significant effect on the individual's well-being, stress levels, and functioning. So this is a study conducted by DVA and Defence. You can find it online through DVA's portal, the Mental Health, Wellbeing and Transition Study. And through that study, they found that 46% of ADF members who had transitioned from service within the past 5 years of this study met diagnostic criteria for a mental health disorder. And there was more distress in that group: psychological distress, depression, anxiety, anger, suicidality, and alcohol use. There was more distress in the transition group comparative to a sample of current serving ADF members, highlighting the issues that ex-serving military personnel experience at transition. And the transition ADF group was deemed to be at significant risk. Very interestingly, 84% of that transition group, which included people that were unwell, were still working and engaged in some kind of purposeful activity. I'm going to come back to that. And even though the majority of people took steps to seek help within the first 12 months of having a mental health concern, the findings suggested there was under-engagement in evidence-based treatment, low satisfaction rates, and poor retention rates, which brings concern for this at-risk group who are finding it hard to engage in good services. And my view on what some of the current issues are regarding this situation is that I think most research studies and most clinicians in this area tend to focus on symptoms, skills training, mental health outcomes. And I think it's quite narrow and doesn't answer all of the questions. And it was because of this that I wanted to look beyond PTSD and current skills and symptoms and see what else could be going on in this picture. So current services tend to focus on PTSD and symptom relief, whereas most soldiers do not identify with having PTSD or being unwell. Soldiers focus on function, not dysfunction. And that's highlighted in that 84% of transition members who were working and who were engaged in some kind of meaningful activity. So even though they're distressed, they can function even when they're not well, even when there's dysfunction. And I was also seeing that in the group of personnel where I was talking about the fake resilience. Soldiers are very good at functioning, even when there's dysfunction going on. And I believe one of the core issues here is to accept support. A soldier needs to be able to emotionally connect and have vulnerability, but accepting support and being emotionally vulnerable and connected is not part of being a soldier. And this is a huge gap that is resulting and I believe exacerbating a lot of the issues that we're seeing in veterans. And the reason why soldiers and veterans find it so hard to engage in support is because of the stigmas. And these stigmas were again identified in the Mental Health and Wellbeing Transition Study. And these stigmas included other people would lose confidence in them, they would be seen to be weak, they would be treated differently, they would feel worse during being unable to solve their own problems, and they would feel embarrassed. And these stigmas keep the soldier functioning, despite the dysfunction and despite the distress and despite even the recognition of needing help. And the most common reasons for not seeking assistance is that perceived preference to self-manage, an ability to function effectively, and the fear of asking for help. And those first two, the perceived preference to self-manage and the ability to function effectively, are very common aspects and values of being a soldier. It's really important that a soldier can self-manage and function effectively. And those things get in the road of asking for help. So there's this absence of being able to be vulnerable, particularly in the military. And so the soldier consequently experiences difficulties understanding emotions, emotionally processing traumatic events, emotionally connecting, emotionally regulating, and just generally allowing, expressing any type of vulnerability, because that's not part of being a soldier. And we're going to have a look at that. There is no current research out there investigating and addressing the beliefs that soldiers have developed during military and the extent to which these themselves could be preventing a successful transition to civilian life. Yet, it's been shown that those who internalize the military identity, beliefs, and values the most find transition more difficult. So again, there's this gap that if we internalize this military identity and belief and values, we're going to find transition difficult. Yet understanding those beliefs and values and where they come from and why they're there, there's not much out there currently. And this is a huge focus of the work that I do. And this is where I believe schema therapy can help. And I'm going to talk about what schema therapy is and how it can address the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral effects of service. So what is schema therapy? So schema therapy is an appropriate, evidence-based approach to address systemic identity and cultural issues evident in a person, including a military person, and it focuses on the origins of psychopathology. In this case, again, I'm talking about the military culture. Schema therapy is based in cognitive therapy. It's gaining a lot of interest and research momentum at the moment, and it provides us an evidence-based approach to really look at the cultural and systemic identity effects of service and where that comes from. Schema therapy empowers people to create fundamental change by challenging, organizing, and making sense of who they are. This characterological disturbances, it's about the sense of who is my character, who am I? So it helps make sense of the process of making sense of life after the military and once the person can no longer be a soldier. And so we're not just looking at symptom change here, we're really looking at that fundamental change in terms of what's disrupting a soldier transition. And schema therapy has great evidence to support it being presented in a group format, which is really important for a military population because that provides the really important social buffer that we know is really important for military personnel. Schema therapy investigates and challenges core ingrained maladaptive beliefs and behaviors that in this case have been developed and perpetuated by the military culture. And by doing this, it allows us to assist ex-serving military personnel understand the cultural effects of service so they can start to make appropriate adjustments to their core beliefs, values, and behaviors. And this is really important for the soldier successfully transitioning and reintegrating into the community. So what becomes important is for us to look at how the military condition a soldier. And I think just by these two very simple pictures on the screen, it helps us see very clearly that there's a process that goes on to create a soldier that can do a job. And a soldier is developed and created by the military through their training to perform this job. And I know that this is an American recruit, instructor, drill sergeant picture, but the same thing goes on for our forces in Australia. So I call this the soldier mode. And in schema therapy, modes is just about a state of being. Schemas are the core beliefs, and the mode is the state of being. And I think a soldier is a learnt state of being. And so we talk about the soldier mode that's being developed by the military to do a job. And the soldier mode is created by this force structured process that happens to socialize civilians to the military. And it happens from the moment that you get to basic training. I tend to talk about soldiers. I tend to talk about the other ranked soldiers rather than officers. But in essence, the moment you reach your initial basic training, there's a process that starts from that point. For soldiers, it's akapuka. It is before you even get off the bus. Somebody comes onto that bus and immediately starts socializing you to the military culture. And that's to get you to internalize the military values. From that moment, your identity and individuality is stripped and altered, because you have to fully integrate into the military culture, because that's what's required and expected and needed. Really important. It's needed to perform the military tasks. And if you look, again, I think this picture of basic training really highlights everyone's the same. You lose your individuality. You get the same haircut, you wear the same clothes, you're given the same kit in the same bedrooms, because your individuality at that point is taken away to create the soldier that can do the job. And this process is really important. Human beings have a natural resistance to killing their own kind. I don't know if anyone's seen the Grossman book on killing, but it talks about the issues, like we are not wired to kill our own kind. And so again, there's a process that needs to go on to make that happen. And this came from World War II. They found only 50 to 20% of American riflemen in combat during World War II fired at the enemy. So the military had to adapt their training to ensure that soldiers were properly equipped physically and psychologically to be able to do their job. They had to overcome that natural resistance to killing and the human's natural fear response. Soldiers had to be conditioned to ensure that they could do any required military action without conscious thought when required. And this conditioning process hardens the soldier. It hardens the soldier with military attributes. With masculine attributes. It reinforces hardness and toughness and stoicism and self-reliance and aggressiveness. It removes more feminine, more vulnerable aspects of being human. It reinforces conformity to group norms, and it creates a distance between the soldier and the civilian. And this conditioning process ensures that in an operational environment, the soldier will perform their job and they will do what's required in order to meet the outcome required. I do not believe that the military can train in any other way. It's a very adaptive, effective training system that allows and assures a group of individuals to be able to come together and operate in a way to perform a function. And it's very important and very needed. And it's imperative in operational environments. And because of the changes in the conditioning process and the training requirements over the years, the firing rate in combat has increased from 15% in World War II to 90% in Vietnam. So it's effective, it works. And again, I don't think that we can train in any other way, because we need that process to be able to do that job in that environment at that time. And this process is really important for the individual. So this conditioning process creates the soldier to do the job for the organization. But for the individual, it creates stability, security, safety, acceptance, belonging, identity, meaning, purpose, and a sense of competence. For some people that join the military, this is the first time that these core needs have ever been met. And these are core needs that we all have. These are things that everybody needs. And if you come from a background that's been difficult or troublesome, you know, you will find these things in the military. If you come from a good background where other things, you know, may have been okay, you're still provided with these core things. And these core things allow you to do your job, allow you to function, and allow you to operate, again, in a high-risk operational environment. In an environment where there is no safety, where safety comes from trusting your kit, trusting your team, security, safety, stability, it comes from being a soldier and being in that cohort of people that are trained in the same way to do the same job. And with that, with the ability to do that, becomes acceptance, and you are given an identity. You are given an identity in a box. You feel like you belong, you have meaning and purpose, and you feel really good about yourself, and you have a sense of who you are and what you can do and achieve. And that feels really good. And so individuals naturally attach to their soldier identity, and it gets reinforced through the honor and pride that's generated through military training, and through the privilege of being able to call yourself a soldier. You think, you know, your first day at initial training versus the last day, you know, there's a huge difference and a growth process that goes on. And when you can put on your hat and your dress and walk around the parade, march around the parade ground, and hold your head up high and have the privilege of calling yourself a soldier, there's a lot of honor and pride that comes along in that. And it feels really good. And it feels really good to be able to be that person and to be able to do that job. And then that mode, that identity, that sense of being gets reinforced throughout the career. So particularly if you're deployed on operations, you know, I remember often hearing, you're not a soldier until you've gone on operations. And there's that sense of self that's able to, and sense of pride that's able to come through by being able to go on operations and do your job and do it well. And so the longer you serve, the more deployments you do, the more you invest in being a soldier and in the military, the more attached to this identity you get, and the more dependent you get on being a soldier. So this process, the indoctrination process that happens at basic training, creates a shift. It creates a shift in the individual's identity and in their worldviews. And that's really adaptive for the military environment, because your worldviews are shaped by a world that is required for the military. Your view of yourself, your view of other people, the view of the world around you is shaped by the military. A very adaptive, very important, but it poses issues for the individual later on when they try and come back into the community. You know, the process of separating the soldier from the community and at the start is so significant that then to re-enter back into the community is really difficult, because you've spent so much time separating and differentiating yourself from other people and having many good things come with that, that it is hard to attach back and come back into the community. And this can result in ex-service military personnel getting lost. You once belonged in the military world, you're now supposed to belong in the civilian world, but you don't want to, or you can't, or it's hard. And you get lost between these two worlds. And that is very distressing and really, really difficult for any individual to not have that sense of belonging, meaning, purpose, identity, acceptance, safety, stability, security. Those things get lost, and that naturally generates psychological distress. So I'm flying through much faster than what I thought. So that's why I'm slowing down a little bit. But I guess this slide brings together my view of the soldier mode, encompasses it all. So the self prior to the army is discarded, and I refer to that as the lost self. The self now becomes dependent on being a soldier. And the wounds of service have not been understood or processed or healed because the soldier cannot have any vulnerability. And so you can get very stuck in this unhealthy cycle of not knowing or wanting to know the person you were before the military, only wanting to be the soldier that you were in the military but can't be anymore. And all of the stuff that's happened in your career hasn't been processed. There's not a space for it to be able to go because the vulnerability and the emotion has been shut out. So I'm thinking I might pause and check in on any questions.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I've got a question here. Thanks, Megan. Really interesting. Is it possible to take the experience and break it down so it can apply to city life? How long does it take to work through that?
Yeah, so I'm sort of going to start to lead into that. What do we do with that? Because that's really the hard bit. And I think that the first part of this is about understanding how the military has shaped the person. Because when you understand that, then you can start to go, okay, well, where do I go with that? And honestly, when I look at all of the veterans that I work with, in terms of process, generally it's a good couple of years. Okay, so I tend to find a good 2 years is where we're really starting to get a sense of identity, more stability and security. Some people can do 12 months. It depends on how long you've been out, what your experiences have been out, what help you're getting. There's a lot of factors that do come into play.
Okay, I've got another question. Is it possible or healthy to stay being a soldier in the mindset when you are a civilian?
Yeah, this is a great question. And honestly, I see lots of people tend to do this. And I think that, unfortunately, my view is that the current system supports you either being a soldier or an unwell veteran. And I think it's actually hard to find the balance in between. And honestly, if you had a preference, I think it would be healthier for you to stay a soldier because there's more capacity to function in that state than not in that state, and to fall into the trap of the unwell veteran shifting through the medical cycle. So there is an adaptive element to that, very much so. I have a guy that I've seen, and he set up his own business, and he was out of the army, been out of the army for a long time, but he was still a soldier and running his business. It's adaptive, but it's limited. You can't, you still have those difficulties connecting and being able to connect to other people and yourself in the community. And I guess there's nothing wrong with it, and certainly take the good elements out of being a soldier, but perhaps see if it's if it's enough, I guess, you know, you might still find that there's limits.
Yeah, it probably could have been a sailor.
This model, say again?
Just having a stab at the soldiers.
I'm sorry, I should have apologized that at the start. I do talk soldier, that's my background. My background's Army.
That's fine. I've got another question here. Hi Megan, some of my post-service stuff has me really feeling lost, like I don't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it much because I was branded a malingerer. How do I deal with that? So
yeah,
that's what you sort of spoke about earlier, didn't you? Sort of how to,
because this is the issues getting help, and what drives the soldier is what I call the scolding military mode, okay, which more so reflects, I don't know if here we go, that sort of drill instructor mentality. So it's very good at scolding you to keep you in your soldier mode. And the feelings of lost and a lack of belonging are what I see all the time. And this is what this tends to treat and tends to focus on, again, more than PTSD and symptoms, because it's looking at how this happened to help undo it, to help you find the sense of self. And, you know, it does come from finding the right support and treatment, which, you know, if we go on a little bit, I'll go on a little bit more and then we can take some more questions, because some of the next little bits might sort of answer, because I guess these slides really tend to target for veterans. So the soldier mode, it focuses on tasks, outcomes, things to do, things to be done, achievements and efficiencies, okay? The soldier mode finds it very hard to connect in relationships. Communication is very direct. It's actually interesting when I talk to soldiers about the way that they communicate in relationships, and it's direct, it's down the line, and then they can't understand how or why their partners are getting upset or why we're not on the same page. Because in the military, communication is very direct and very down the line and straightforward. And it's not that there is something wrong with that. It's just in relationships, that's not the most effective way to communicate. It's very effective for the military, not so effective in relationships. Soldiers tend to, I say this very cautiously, I'm going to say lack empathy and understanding. It's not that the person lacks empathy and understanding, but a soldier has to do a job, okay? And in that moment, we have to focus on the job that needs to be done. And therefore, as a byproduct and consequence of that, we can lack empathy. And this sort of talks about this scolding, critical side that steps in and scolds you when expectations are not being met, that maintains this soldier mode. And soldiers find it very hard to slow down. They tend to operate really fast, really efficiently, really focused on outcomes, and it's quite hard to slow and stop and settle. So I know that there's a mixed bunch of people listening, so these slides sort of start to target, I guess, the message that I have for veterans about this. I would recommend you watch a YouTube clip called You're Not in the Forces Now. If you just Google You're Not in the Forces Now, it'll come up. This is a clip, and I was really, you know, I've done this work for a long time, and I only found this clip this year, which was very surprising to me, because it's been around. This was a clip developed after Vietnam. What I like about this video is it talks about the effects of service and how that impacts on a person being in the now. And I think it covers a lot of the elements that I've spoken about today and looks at what gets in the road of you being able to be well now. Now, at the end of it, it is more skills focused, so it focuses on the skills and the things you need to do to be well. That's where I think it's a bit limited. But just understanding the conditioning effects and the impact that that has on you and how that contributes to PTSD, I'd recommend having a watch, partners too. I would say it's okay to not be okay. I know it's very hard for soldiers to express vulnerability and have vulnerability, but it's okay to not be okay. Accepting support and opening up is really difficult, but you've got to find the right person and people to help you. And just remember, this is just a learnt way of being. You've learned to be this way. The military has taught you how to be this way, but it's actually only really adaptive in military environments. It can be adaptive in work environments. It can help you function in society. Okay, but it's quite limited and it's just a learnt way of being. And you can learn a new way of being, which is really important for your future, but it will take support. Understanding the psychological effects of service start to create that change. There's positive and negative elements to this. But it's the start of the journey, is understanding how did I get here and why am I this way, to start to go, okay, well, what's working for me and what's not working for me and what do I want to change? Finding your own identity outside of being a soldier is really difficult, but it's part of the process. When you leave, it's about evaluating what's good about being a soldier and what's not good, and what can I take with me, and what elements do I actually need to learn to let go of to help me find out who I want to be. And you have to be able to heal the wounds from service. There's a lot of grief and healing that goes on in that adjustment, in that post-service transition period. And that's why I say it's about 2 years, because you've got to heal, you've got to grow, you've got to work out who you are, you've got to kind of explore different things until you can reach the point where you have, you know, more awareness of who you are and what you want to do. Very unfortunately, this is something that basically I've developed. So unfortunately, it's not standard practice at the moment. I've started to run training for clinicians this year, and I'm doing some supervision. And so there are clinicians out there that are starting to get this information to learn about how to help veterans in a different way. But at the moment, it is very limited, and I apologize for that, but I promise I'm working really, really hard to get this out there and hopefully have a change and a shift in what current services are being provided. We're developing a group program, and we've got a research project underway as well. So we're really hoping that we're going to be able to reach more people, because I know that this is hard, and I know veterans like to be self-sufficient and work it out for themselves. And what I can say is your starting point is understanding how you got here, looking at what's helpful and not helpful, to start to undo the bits that weren't helpful and start to find yourself. So the only other slides just for clinicians, and then I'll take some more questions, but just to finish off clinically, I found it's a very effective treatment model. Veterans feel understood, and once you feel understood, they're more willing to express vulnerability, address the effects of service, connect emotionally, and process the traumatic experiences. So this is my training that I run. For anybody, my website, this has a page about workshops and about schema therapy. There's information on there about effects of service, talks that I've done, training that I'm running. The Melbourne workshop is off. The Canberra workshop is definitely going ahead. I have a few places left, and the Sydney workshop is currently dependent on numbers. I have a Facebook page, Schema Therapy Brisbane, and that's just training that I'm running for clinicians. In terms of where we're at for veterans, I'm working on it because I really believe in this approach and I really find it helpful. So happy to take any questions.
That's good. I've got a few questions. Some of them are similar. I'll try and group them into one. One says, once a warrior, always a warrior.
Yeah.
I'm still a warrior 10 years after discharge.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose it, but I know I need to dial it back. How?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about getting rid of this. You do not want to get rid of this part. There's way too much good in being a soldier, okay? But it's about learning. We ran a trial group program, and at the end of it, we sort of said to the guys, you know, where do you see the soldier part? And for all of them, they said it was just behind, okay? It's learning to recognize that the warrior, the soldier, is one part of you. It's not all of you. And when you can see it as just one part of you, then you can ask it to step back to let another part of you come forward. And that's scary and uncertain and difficult because you've got to expose some vulnerability, but you don't want to let it go. You want to be able to call it forward whenever you need it, but you also don't want it driving the car. If you think about it, I always use my car analogy. Who's driving the car? Okay. If the warrior's driving the car, well, you know, hang on. But, you know, you want him to be in the back seat.
Okay. I've got one here from Peter. Thanks for the interesting research and perspectives. Does military service help to create a mindset for purpose? And then when leaving the military, losing a focus of purpose causes a lot of the well-being issues. And or also then having a life post-service is then always seen through a lens of having purpose. And when it can't be found, then a lot of other problems are created. So
Yeah.
it's
So my view
still
is,
that loss of purpose.
yeah. And essentially, yes, I guess that's that kind of say in a nutshell. You're on the right track and the right sorts of thinkings. The military create meaning and purpose through identity and through this part that can perform a role. Because the soldier part of you is so focused on doing, on purpose, on achievement, on outcomes, then, and you naturally want to associate with that because that's what feels good, then meaning and purpose becomes so important for you. So you look for that thing out there in the world that's going to give you that same sense of purpose and meaning and belonging that you got from the military because the military gave it to you. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to get that because that's not actually where meaning and purpose comes from. If you want to read a good book, I recommend Brené Brown, Braving the Wilderness, which is all about meaning and about belonging and the sense of belonging. And it doesn't actually exist out there. It actually exists inside. And it becomes about yourself and the relationship that you have with yourself and finding your own identity and sense of belonging within you, which is then no longer dependent on anything out in the world, which makes it more secure for you.
Okay, I've got another one here. It was more of a comment. Why you probably already answered it due to your still researching. Why aren't soldiers shown this information on discharge? So
this is my intent. This is my plan. I'm working on a workshop that I hope would be delivered to people leaving the military because there is nothing that exists. You look at what goes into making a soldier, how much training, the skill development, all of that, and then there is nothing on the other side. And that is something that has never sat well with me. And that is what this is about. And ultimately, I hope one day that this is where we get. The research project is looking at a group program to be able to see if we could implement it. Ideally, the sooner the better. And I'd really like to see it definitely for people leaving the military. I actually think it's really important. And hopefully that's where we'll get.
definitely. We've got one here from Kelly. Thanks, Megan. We're all many things throughout our lives and must adapt, evolve, and change. Much of what we expect and much of what we don't. In saying that, wouldn't it be useful to have this conversation about leaving the next career and life after service at the beginning of service?
I don't necessarily think it should happen at the beginning of service. I've thought about this a lot. And again, I don't think the military can train in any other way. And I actually think that the way that they train is, again, very important to create the soldier that can do the job on operations. But what I do think is that there's a particular point in the military where I think we need to start personal development, because we need to have the soldier being able to do the job, but at some point we need to be able to develop ourselves personally so that we have something to go to. And that's not something that the military is very good at. And I think that there's definite room for that growth to start to happen in service at a particular point. I don't know, but my guess would be, again, Army, sorry, but around the corporal sort of level when you're starting junior leadership. I think at that point there's opportunity, but I think that that's difficult for the organization because it compromises, you're bringing in individuality again, and for the organization that's an issue.
That's right. We've got one here from Brett. Should the ADF untrain us when we leave? So it just carries on from what you're just talking about.
Yeah.
So there should be some type of decompression or some program. Once you're sort of got the decision or made the decision, there should be a program to probably, desensitize or whatever.
Yeah, very much so. And you know, the one element of my workshop, of my research, will be just a 2-day workshop. What effect can we have with a 2-day workshop versus a longer group program, like a 10-week group program? How much do we actually need here? Like, these are all questions that we need to have. But in essence, 100% we need this. The military is conditioned. The military needs to desensitize and condition and change again. And that process needs to go on. It's not going on. This is what I'm passionate about.
I suppose that you can always say that it actually costs more money in the long run.
Correct.
Once they get out, and then there's all those other things that arise that you might have been able to address a lot earlier. So it's also a cost factor. Not that it's a veteran, money spent on veteran is wasted, but it's just like getting smarter with the resources we have.
And I 100% agree. And again, I tread cautiously and say tenuously, but I think a lot of money is wasted. And I certainly think that we, you know, again, could be doing things from a different perspective, particularly a more preventative approach. You're not going to stop, you know, the unwell cases, but I think we certainly could be doing things differently. Yeah. And I think that there's opportunity for that, and capacity for that. And I just think, and if you look at the research, it says that we should be doing it sooner. It says we should be doing it sooner. We should be doing it as a group. Certainly from my clinical experience, that's what we should be doing. If I get someone that's transitioning out, the effects that I can have to get them adjusted into the military is far, like I can definitely do that within 12 months whilst they're undergoing that medical separation process. And that is hugely different to someone that's been sitting post-transition in a medical realm or just been trying to work it out for X number of years. It just takes longer and gets harder.
That's right. Too often you hear about people, one day they're in, the next day they're either starting a civilian job or they're medic discharged, so it's, the whole system's sort of failed them sometimes. And so they don't get that opportunity to somehow decompress, so they take that with them. Does that make sense? Or? Yeah,
definitely. And I think that unfortunately the system, again, I think the system's got gaps, okay? And, you know, you've got a military system that focuses on function and performance, and you have a DVA system that focuses on unwellness. The more unwell you are, the more support and service you get. So again, there's a huge gap in the middle that where nothing's sort of, you know, really being done. And again, I think that there's opportunity to do that. And this schema therapy approach is the first thing that I found where we can say, okay, this is what's happened. This is how they've made you be. We can undo this, you know, through these processes, which is about learning to understand that this is just a part of you that's been developed to do a job, but there are other parts of you where you can find out who you are. You know, neuroscientist Dan Siegel talks about differentiation for integration. You know, you've got to differentiate these parts to understand them, to be able to integrate them into who you are. It's not an easy process.
Yeah, definitely. I've got another question here. Got a few questions. That's good. Do you find military personnel are recruited according to a personality style, and that the soldier or military persons are just people with similar personality styles that are exaggerated by training, culture, and operations?
So this is where schema therapy gets really, really interesting, okay? Because schema therapy is like, schemas are like traits. We tend to view them as traits. They link closely to our personality. Now, I'd love to do a research project on this, but in reality, I think that there's two particular schemas that attract and are reinforced in the military. One schema is a subjugation schema, which is the need to please other people. It's where we serve. We're willing to serve the organization. The organization comes first. It's prioritized over the individual and anything to do with the individual. So I must serve and please others before the self. Okay, and I think that that's an important part of being a service person. And the other is an unrelenting standard schema, which is I will do whatever it takes, you know, I have, my standards are unrelenting, you know, that they're above and beyond. I will do whatever it takes. And it's the belief that, you know, the concept that it's never quite good enough, that you always want to have more. I think those two things are important about being recruited in and really brought out through military training and reinforced.
Okay. Got another question here. I'm finding it really hard to come forward for help when many of the ex-service organisations that should be working for veterans are doing my post-service identity harm too. Feel like I am being attacked from my past and my present. Is this part of it?
It dropped out a little bit there.
I think they're basically asking if the ex-service organisations, do you think if they could do more?
Okay, so I think that there are many, many, many good organisations out there trying really hard and doing really good work. Again, I think that there's limits and gaps, and this is what I see. And I think it's hard because ex-service personnel are made up of ex-service people who are all a soldier, who can tend to reinforce the military soldier mode mentality. You know, I spent Anzac Day in Toowoomba with my father-in-law, a Vietnam veteran, and a group of other Vietnam veterans, and I'm like, I can see the soldier mode in all of you this many years later, you know. I believe that people have a genuine interest and desire to help, and I think this is why I come back to, I think that this is an important aspect that's being missed, that needs to be looked at, because people don't want to disrupt the soldier because it's got so many good things about it. But if we don't disrupt the soldier, you can't get the support you need, you stay lost, you can't reintegrate effectively. And it's being able to say there's good things about this, but there's not so good things. And we need to find the space.
Definitely. Okay, I've got two more questions. So we've still got 5 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, the second last one is what you were saying, Megan, for a program on discharge was recommended by several people at the ADF transition inquiry last year, but it didn't make the final report. How do we get them to listen? I probably have seen that report, but I'll be definitely keen to have another look at it and see what happened.
So my current stance on this, and to be honest, this is the first time that I've sort of really put this work out there other than starting to talk to clinicians about this. I have tried. I have jumped up and down, you know, particularly when I left working on base as a contracted psychologist, beating my head against the system, as so many people do. You need to listen, look at me, you know. I don't believe that that approach works. So my intent is I'm going back to uni to do a research project to publish research that we can then present. I don't think that this is enough to have people listen. I know it works. The clinicians that are starting to use this see how it works. But to get the organization to hear us, we need to have the research behind us. I think that that's what's going to make them listen. So that's where my focus and energy is going into, is to publish research that can show this and prove this, because then they have to look at it. There's nowhere else where they can look. So that's my approach.
That's good. I think we've got time for one or two. I think another one just popped up. So the more you talk, the more people want to ask questions. So it's good. The last two questions sort of roll into each other. I'll do it in two parts, because there's one from Peter and there's one from someone else. Peter says, how can we get more involved with your ongoing and future research as veterans? And the second part is from someone else. Would Wellbeing Australia be able to get Megan back to do this sort of workshop online for veterans that can't go places? So
yep.
I suppose it comes down to resources, sponsorship.
Okay, so in terms of support for this, thank you. I just want to say a huge thank you. I'm really glad that this is reaching people and making sense, and that's why I wanted to be here today. As I say, I've been quite isolated with this, wanting to make sure that what I'm talking about is right and it works, and I'm sort of braving the wilderness myself to step out and start talking about it. So I really thank the people that want to support this. Unfortunately, look, what I'll say is any updates that I'm doing, they will go on my website and they will go on the Schema Therapy Brisbane page. At the moment, the research project, it's at the start. I've got to go through ethics before I can say or do anything about that. I can only say at this point that there is a research project happening. In terms of Wellbeing Australia, well, I'll leave that up to them to answer. You know, I guess there's some options. We'd have to be quite creative. It's not an easy thing. I mean, this is the background. The actual work is very integrative. It's best done face-to-face, but hopefully an opportunity will come where we can run a workshop, a group program or something around Australia when we can get this more off the ground.
Yeah, that's really good. What was the last one? No, I think that was it. I'll get Jackie. I will ask Jackie to include all your information when she collates it all. Yes. So when the presentation goes on the website, it'll have all the information there. But we can definitely on the Wellbeing Australia Twitter and Facebook advertise those links already. So we'll go from there. There's no more questions, but I really think that you've given people some more food for thought, definitely. It's a great thing that you're doing, and it's really interesting. And it really fits into, I've watched some of the other presentations since the start of this, and they all seem to be linking them into each other. So I thought it would have been a bit more sporadic, for want of a better term. But they're all linking into each other. So the loss and the grief and trying to fit in. So it's really good. So you're doing a really good work there. So I hope it continues.
Thank you so much. And thank you to, again, everyone for being here and supporting. And I think that, these are core issues. And I think even the research is seeing this. The research is coming back to these core issues. So there is a lot of work going on in this space because we are really seeing the issues. The what to do about it is hard. And that's where people probably have a different idea.
Yeah. Okay, I think the hour's up. We probably could go for another hour asking questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Megan. I hope we can have you on here again or something similar. And congratulations on the work you're doing, and keep up the great work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.